The first report came in the coarse, unadorned speech of a man who had spent his youth driving picks into England's bowels. Thomas Greaves, tunnel foreman to the Manchester Ship Canal Works, stood with his cap clutched against a chest like a barrel, and described in a voice that tried for gruffness but could not quite master its tremor how a surveyor had walked into a brick-lined bore and never come back out. It had been a Tuesday night when the city's breath condensed in white plumes above the canals, and the soot upon the viaduct arches took on a greasy sheen under the gas lamps. Greaves and his men had been clearing detritus from a disused spur that ran beneath Deansgate toward the older railway tunnels. The spur had been bricked up after an accident some years ago, but recent subsidence demanded inspection. A panel had been opened under the authority of the municipal engineer, and the surveyor, one Mr. Edwin Mallory, a precise young man of excellent references, had stepped inside with a lamp, a chalk line, and a notebook tucked into his breast pocket. He gave us a whistle to let us know he'd reached the bend, Greaves said, his thumb working the seam of his cap. A single note, sharp-like. Then we heard another sound, queer as a kettle, only deeper. The men shifted when they heard it, but Mallory called back, "Steady as you please," and said to let him mark the brick and measure the fall. At the mouth of the spur the men waited, watching the lamplight smear upon damp brick and the faint threads of steam coil from the void. 10 minutes passed, then 12. Greaves himself leaned into the opening, calling the surveyor's name. No reply came from beyond the bend, no scrape of boot, no scuff of tripod, not even the wet echo of a drip upon the flagstones. Only that deep, kettle-throated tone, now wavering as if a great breath were drawn and held and let go in the blackness beyond. "We set a rope around my middle," Greaves continued, "and I took the second lamp. It were cold in there, cold as a vault, and there were a smell like match heads after you strike 'em. I passed the bend and, Lord help me, saw a light like a churchyard candle, only greenish like them glowworms in summer hedges. It bobbed between the brick and the air, and then it were gone, and so were the marks of Mr. Mallory's boots, as if the floor had swallowed him whole." No one among the labourers would go further. Greaves hauled himself out, cursing the superstition of men who could drive a shaft through clay, but would turn pale at a shadow. They fetched 2 constables with truncheons and borrowed courage. The officers entered a little way, and emerged again in short order, their moustaches beaded with condensed vapour, and their bravado dissipated. The panel was re-bricked by morning under the orders of an alderman who preferred ghosts to headlines. That might have been the end of the matter, filed away with other civic embarrassments beneath. The parchment of official minutes had there not been the second occurrence 2 nights later. A clerk from a cotton warehouse, one Mr. Arthur Glaze, walked home along the towpath after late balancing of accounts. He was seen by a night soil man near Castlefield, his stick tapping the stones, his breath fogging in rhythm with his measured stride. He passed beneath a railway arch, and, at its apex, paused. The night soil man swore to a pale gleam that hovered in the arch's throat like a will-o'-the-wisp. He saw Glaze lift his stick, startled, and then step just 1 pace into a recess where a ventilation shaft had been bricked over. The pale gleam slid into the wall. When the night soil man reached the spot, panting, there was no clerk, no cry, no scuffle, only the faintest print of a leather heel in soot and 3 chalk marks upon the brick, drawn in a tidy hand. On the 3rd night, Manchester's constabulary, brought to that fevered state of resolve which only public laughter may create, stationed men at intervals along the canal's older arches. Lanterns were trimmed, whistles primed, and oaths sworn with a vigour calculated to hearten recruits. A sergeant named Pell took the central arch, the same that had beheld Mr. Glaze's disappearance, while 2 constables pretended indifference upon the towpath. At 10 minutes past midnight the pale light came again, not a glare, but a ghostly bead, as if a drop of stagnant water had taken to shining and drifted through the air on a private current. Pell, who had the nerve of a farrier and the stubbornness of a mule, stepped forward with his truncheon high. He called out that the hoax had gone far enough. The light receded as if to draw him on. Pell made for it with a curse and a boot against the arch. The constables heard the scrape of leather and the muffled oath. They hurried under the arch and found nothing. No sergeant, no scuffle, no drop of blood. Only a smear of dark soot upon the edge of a recess, and, upon the stone just above a man's reach, a single chalk cross. By dawn there were mutters in the public houses of Castlefield, and ancoats of a Roman spirit reclaimed by the digging, of a plague pit unsettled by modern rashness, of a nameless thing that breathed in the tunnels and told for men with its kettle note. The Manchester Guardian chose restraint, printing the barest facts and directing its readers to the constabulary's promise of prudence and vigour. The evening papers chose otherwise. Ghost in the tunnels, span bills in black capitals. A cartoonist depicted a pale spectre leading an alderman by the nose. The alderman, whose nose in life was both long and proud, was one Sir Alister Croom, a man whose investments touched rail, canal, and cotton in equal measure, and whose dislike of ridicule was exceeded only by his abhorrence of interruption at dinner. It was he who, swallowing both necessity and pride, sent a telegram south by the first light of Thursday. The message, brusque, spare, and charged by the word, slid beneath the brass rails at a lodging in Baker Street and came to rest among envelopes that smelled faintly of Russian tobacco. By the time the lunch club boys at the Reform were placing wagers on whether the ghost would take a mill owner next, the telegram had reached the only mind in England that might reasonably be expected to put an end to such fancies. Sir Alister's hand, usually so firm upon a ledger, had not been immune to the sway of rumour. His signature sprawled like a fallen fence at the foot of the appeal. Manchester, disappearance in tunnels, 2 civilians, 1 police sergeant, no trace, pale, luminous phenomenon, public alarm, request immediate assistance, Alistair Croom. It is not my habit to anticipate the exact direction of Mr. Sherlock Holmes's thoughts. He, for his part, never required mine for their propulsion. Yet when later I learned, from Holmes's laconic remark, that he had always distrusted green lights underground, I confess I felt a humiliation particular to practitioners of my profession. There are, after all, odours a physician knows by name, vapours that take the lungs in certain ways. A match-head smell, Greaves had said. An air that steamed upon moustaches. A light that seemed to breathe. In Manchester, under brick that had known the footsteps of navvies and the boots of constables, some agency, human or otherwise, had made 3 men vanish as neatly as coins into a conjurer's palm. The talk of ghosts was absurd, the effect upon the city was not. Sir Alister's telegram lay upon the mantel at Baker Street, and London's smoke rolled eastward, indifferent to the anxieties of its northern sister. In the tunnels, the kettle note sounded and was still, and somewhere between a chalk mark and a smear of soot, a hand, cool, deliberate, and very much alive, had left its spoor. I found Holmes at the window with Sir Alister's telegram held to the light. He had not breakfasted. Coffee steamed beside the violin, and a scatter of ash mapped constellation upon yesterday's Times. Without turning, he said in that dry fashion that greets fact more readily than friend, "You observed the order, Watson? Pale, luminous phenomenon before public alarm. Our alderman fears ridicule more than tragedy." "You mean to go?" I asked. Of course, pack stout boots and leave room for something more practical than sentiment. Manchester tunnels are no place for romance. He glanced at his watch. The noon train from Euston. With luck, dinner by 7, work by 9. By 2 o'clock we were rattling north. Holmes sat opposite with the telegram flattened on his knee. He had penciled 3 notes: phosphorus, draft note, chalk marks deliberate. He tested the air at the sash and, when he spoke, it was to himself. A match-head smell suggests phosphorus or sulphur. A cold air with steam upon moustaches argues a fall of temperature. The light, greenish, might be calcium sulfide. Our kettle note could be an organ pipe, but why chalk? Why beadsome and then, not warning, counting? You think the mark's genuine? I said. A boy draws exuberantly. These are tidy, at a man's reach, with a surveyor's hand. If Mallory wrote the 3 bars, a second hand answered with a cross, a dialogue on brick. Rain had begun by the time we entered Manchester. Sir Alister Croom's carriage waited. The alderman received us in a dining room laid out like a ledger. "You understand my position," he said. "I will not have panic among my men nor laughter in the clubs. Bring your skill, Mr. Holmes, but keep my name from the papers." "If my name suffices," Holmes returned, "yours need not appear." After dinner, the foreman Greaves brought a rough pencil map of the spur. Holmes's eyes brightened. "You mark a shallow curve here," he said. "A draught there would sing if a narrow throat lay beyond. How wide the recess where the sergeant vanished?" 2 foot 6 at the mouth, sir," Greaves answered, "and deeper by a half-yard." "And above?" "Sealed brick since the ventilation went to a new shaft. No man could pass that way." "No man openly," Holmes said, "and yet 3 men are gone. You reported the smell of struck matches and a cold as of a vault. Take me there." Inspector Collis met us at Castlefield, with lanterns. "You'll find no ghosts," he said, "but you may find a criminal with a trick lantern. The sergeant's widow believes neither." We filed beneath the arches where canal and railway kept uneasy company. Rain turned the stone to black glass. The assigned recess yawned at shoulder height, a dark mouth with a lip of fresh mortar. Above it the chalk sat at a man's full stretch. Holmes mounted the wall, held the light close, sniffed, then dabbed the brick with a moistened finger. "Salt," he murmured. "Old air, a breath from stagnant water, and this cross, drawn not with school chalk, but a clay mixed with salt. A surveyor's stick might carry it." "And the sound?" I asked. "Quiet." He extinguished our lantern. The city retreated to a hum. For a moment we heard only the drip of unseen points, then, low, wavering and deep, a note swelled from within the recess, as if an enormous bottle sang upon a giant's lip. Holmes smiled in the dark. "A draught through a cavity," he said. "It breathes when pressure shifts on the canal. The men were lured by light, steadied by a rational noise, and taken by engineering." He relit the flame. "Greaves, your hammer!" He tapped the base and sides of the recess, moving upward inch by inch. The sound changed, stone, 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 then a hollower timbre behind a patch of mortar, no larger than a dinner plate. He scraped the edge with his blade. A sliver fell, and iron showed. "A cover," he said. "A plate with a hinge concealed in the bed. The draught comes from behind. Our glowing lure could be shown there and withdrawn. A man leans forward, one tug, and he is gone." Inspector Collis stared. "Into what?" "Into a purpose-made shaft. If I am right, it declines to the canal, where a boat waits without lantern to betray it." He stood back. "We shall not open this by chance. The mechanism is somewhere to hand, a lever masked as brick within arm's reach of a cautious man. Show me where Mr. Glaze's heel printed the soot." Greaves guided us 2 paces left. Holmes crouched, studied the smudge, and laid his palm upon a brick with 3 faint scratches. He pressed. Somewhere within the wall a weight ran. Metal whispered. The plate at the recess thinned to a perilous line. He did not test it. He straightened, and his face, when he turned, had that distant brightness I have seen only when his mind stands upon the lip of revelation. "Gentlemen," he said, "we have our ghost by the throat. Now let us see whose hand it serves." Holmes did not linger once the mechanism was revealed. He pressed the false brick back into place, and the iron plate shut with such precision that the wall seemed whole again. "A snare designed by an engineer," he said, "not a conjurer. Every detail speaks of deliberate construction. Our quarry does not improvise, he plans. Such men may be unmasked only by compelling them to act once more." Inspector Collis wiped the rain from his moustache. "And how, sir, do you propose we coax him into opening his contraption? None of us intends to vanish like poor Pell." Holmes tapped the mortar dust from his fingers. "The villain believes himself secure, which is both his strength and his weakness. He will strike again, but only under circumstances he believes controlled. We must provide him with such a circumstance, under my terms." He looked directly at Collis. "Your men must spread the word quietly that Scotland Yard has sent down an agent, an expert in underground works, who intends to enter the tunnels this very night. He must seem solitary and vulnerable, but he shall not be alone." I knew at once whom he intended to cast in the role, and the prospect chilled me. Yet before I could object, Holmes continued briskly, "Watson, a surveyor's coat and notebook would suit you admirably. Your manner is steady, your step honest, and your presence less likely to arouse suspicion than my own." "Holmes," I began, but he cut me off with that familiar, imperious wave of the hand. "Fear not. I shall be within arm's reach, though unseen. The fellow must believe you his prey, or he will never show his hand. Think of Pell, think of Mallory. Their families deserve the truth." The inspector agreed to Holmes's plan with a grim nod, and Greaves was dispatched to procure the necessary garments. Within an hour I found myself buttoned into a coarse brown coat, my boots muddied to appear well worn, a tape measure dangling from one pocket. Holmes, meanwhile, had vanished into some corner of the works with a bundle that I suspected held one of his disguises. He reappeared later as a stooped navvy, cap pulled low, lantern swinging in a practised arc. The hour grew late. Clouds hung thick above the arches, and the canal lay like black glass. Constables were stationed at discreet intervals, far enough that no whisper would betray their presence, close enough that a single whistle might bring aid. I confess my pulse quickened as Holmes led me to the mouth of the spur. He pressed my hand briefly. "Courage, Watson. Remember, a snare works both ways." I stepped into the recess, lantern lifted, notebook in hand. The air was close, heavy with damp stone, and that faint, sulphurous tang Greaves had described. My footfalls echoed with uncanny clarity, each tap answering itself in the darkness. I forced myself to measure the wall, to scrawl nonsense in the book, though my fingers trembled. Behind me the canal lapped faintly against its stones, and from somewhere beyond the bend came the low, wavering moan of the kettle note. It was then that I saw it, the same pale gleam Greaves had sworn to. It pulsed faintly at the far curve, neither steady flame nor true reflection, but a wavering green bead that floated just above the stone. I took a step toward it, feigning absorption, though my heart hammered. The light receded, bobbing as if beckoning. I felt the chill deepen, vapor curled from my lips. Somewhere behind, unseen, Holmes moved like a shadow. I reached the recess where Pell had vanished. The chalk still marked the brick, faint but visible in the lantern's glow. I bent, tapped the stone with my tape measure, scribbled in the notebook. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A hand, gloved and pale in the dimness, slip from the side of the recess and press a brick with practiced ease. There was a dull grind, and the mortar line at my shoulder quivered. The iron plate was opening. Before I could react, another hand clamped upon my arm, strong and insistent, drawing me toward the recess. I staggered, caught between cry and struggle, the lantern swinging wildly. The plate had opened to reveal a black throat beyond, breathing its cold draught. I was upon the edge of that void when Holmes struck. He sprang from the gloom with a ferocity that startled even me. One hand wrenched the villain's wrist, the other drove a short length of oak against the hidden lever, jamming it open. The man gave a guttural curse, and in the struggling lamplight I glimpsed a face lean and hawkish, eyes glinting with both fury and surprise. He twisted with remarkable strength, wrenching free from Holmes's grasp, and in the melee my lantern toppled, clattering upon stone and sputtering to darkness. Shouts rang from the towpath, whistles shrilled. The man wrenched back, and with a strength born of desperation, hurled himself into the gaping recess. There was the scrape of boot upon iron, the echo of a splash far below, and then nothing but the hollow sigh of the draught. The plate slammed shut with a clang that reverberated through the arch. Constables arrived, lanterns flaring, but the man was gone. Holmes stood motionless, his disguise torn, his eyes fixed upon the wall. "So," he said at last, his voice low, "our ghost has flesh after all, and cunning enough to slip the noose. But he has shown us his hand, Watson, and that is more than half the battle. The tunnels conceal not merely passage, but purpose. We must learn whose." The constables fanned their lanterns across the stonework, their beams scattering on wet mortar, yet no sign of the fugitive remained. The black throat behind the iron plate had swallowed him as readily as it had Pell, Mallory, and Glaze before me. Holmes knelt at the wall, his fingers tracing the mechanism as if willing it to yield a secret. The iron had locked again, seamless in its deception, and the gloved hand that had so nearly dragged me into the abyss seemed already part of the city's folklore. Inspector Collis muttered oaths under his breath while Greaves stood pale as mortar dust, his cap twisting in his hands. Holmes spoke with the calmness of a man reading aloud the score of a game he already understood. "We have proved that the disappearances are no spectres. Our adversary is flesh and blood, trained in mechanics, confident in darkness. He is strong, but not reckless, else he would not have released you when flight became necessary. The purpose of this contrivance is not murder for its own sake. It is concealment." He straightened, the gaslight catching the sharp plane of his face. "We must know what lies beyond that plate, and how far the tunnel stretches." "But the man escaped?" I said, still shaken. "What assurance have we he has not gone to ground where we cannot follow?" "On the contrary, Watson, he has gone to water. Did you not hear the splash? A shaft beneath this recess connects to the canal. There must be a boat, silent, covered, awaiting the cast-off cargo of men he lured. A clever system. One lure above, one escape route below, the whole masked by civic brickwork. Yet no criminal builds such elaborate engines without profit. We must ask, why abduct clerks, surveyors, and sergeants? Why not merchants with purses full of sovereigns? The victims chosen are inconvenient witnesses. Mallory surveyed, Glaze counted ledgers, Pell patrolled. Each stumbled near something meant to be hidden. The inspector tugged at his whiskers. "You think the tunnel conceals smuggling?" Holmes's lip curved faintly. "Smuggling is too crude for such artifice." "No, Collis, we are dealing with theft on an industrial scale. Cotton, coal, even arms. Any might be shifted unseen beneath Manchester's streets. The ghost light is a scarecrow for those who pry, and the trap a broom to sweep them from sight. We returned to Sir Alister's house past midnight, our boots heavy with damp. He awaited us in a dressing gown, his face lined with both fatigue and irritation. "Well?" he demanded. "Have you caught the scoundrel?" "He slipped us," Collis admitted, but Holmes interposed swiftly. "We have seen enough to know this is no mere haunting. Sir Alister, I require a list of those with authority over the canal works and adjacent warehouses, particularly any who might profit by moving goods unseen." The alderman frowned. "You mean to accuse my colleagues?" "I mean to accuse no one," Holmes replied, his tone dry as chalk. "But a ghost requires a lantern, and a lantern requires an owner. Give me names, and I shall give you your culprit." Reluctantly, Sir Alister promised his clerks would compile the list by morning. Holmes and I retired to the lodging secured for us near Piccadilly. I had scarcely removed my damp coat when Holmes began pacing, pipe clamped unlit between his teeth. "Observe the pattern, Watson. Mallory vanished because his survey risked exposing the false wall. Glaze disappeared after marking accounts, likely accounts that did not tally with honest stock. Pell was taken because he was stationed too near the recess for comfort. Our adversary selects only those who brush the edge of discovery. The chalk marks are a ledger of his own. Tally, strike, conceal." I shuddered at the thought. And what of the green light? What substance could give such an eerie glow? Calcium sulfide, perhaps, a chemical lantern easily carried, its flame invisible save for the ghostly phosphorescence. It is both lure and legend, ensuring frightened labourers spread tales of spirits rather than thieves. Ingenious, is it not? Fear is cheaper than bribes and more lasting than locks. We slept little. By dawn, Holmes was already hunched over Sir Alister's list, delivered by a yawning clerk with ink still wet upon the page. He scanned it swiftly, then tapped one name with the stem of his pipe. "Watson, mark this. Mr. Lionel Ash, Deputy Engineer of Works, educated in mechanics, invested in a warehouse adjacent to the canal, and owner of a small steam launch, licensed for night passage, an ideal ghost master." "Do you believe Ash, the man we glimpsed?" I asked. Holmes's eyes glinted. "He is the hand. Whether he is also the head remains to be seen." By afternoon we had traced Ash's warehouse to a row of grim structures backing on to the water. The air smelled of coal dust and damp bales. Holmes examined the locks, the mooring posts, the faint drag marks upon the stones. "A boat has been worked here recently, but too light for cotton bales. Something smaller, cargo of men, not cloth. Tonight, Watson, we shall pay Mr. Ash a visit. I have a mind to see where his ghost rests by day." We withdrew before suspicion might attach to our presence. Holmes spent the hours of waiting in restless preparation, fashioning a small coil of rope, concealing a revolver beneath his coat, and insisting I do the same. "Our quarry is cornered, Watson, and cornered men are dangerous, but he must not think us hounds at his heels. We go as shadows, and shadows only." The rain had ceased by dusk, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under gaslight. We moved silently through narrow lanes until the warehouse loomed before us, its windows dark, its doors barred. Holmes led me along the towpath to the rear, where the canal lapped against pilings. He crouched, running his hand along the stones, then froze. "Here, Watson, fresh marks. The boat returned after last night's escape. He has not abandoned his lair. That means his confidence remains. Good. Very good." From within the warehouse came a faint scrape of iron upon wood, followed by the muffled throb of a small engine. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he gripped my arm. "The ghost prepares another flight. Come, Watson, we shall not let him vanish again." Holmes pressed me back against the shadowed brickwork, his finger raised to his lips. The muffled throb from within the warehouse quickened to a rhythm both steady and deliberate, the unmistakable pulse of a steam launch stirring in readiness. A narrow shaft of light slit the boards of a door, swaying as figures moved within. We crouched among the pilings, the canal lapping softly at our boots. The air smelled of oil and damp rope, tinged still with that faint, sulphurous trace. Holmes leaned close, his whisper barely disturbing the night air. "Patience, Watson. We must let them reveal their course. To strike too soon is to strike blind." The door groaned inward. A figure emerged, cloaked and hooded, followed by two more carrying parcels no larger than a man's chest. They shifted them with care onto the deck of the waiting launch. The first man gave a low order. I could not distinguish the words, but his voice carried the brisk authority of command. Holmes's hand tightened on my arm. "That is Ash, the cadence of a foreman. Mark him well." The others, their faces obscured by caps, moved with the obedience of labourers. The launch rocked under their weight as they boarded, and the throb of the engine deepened, echoing beneath the arches. Holmes signalled for silence as the boat slipped from its moorings and drifted into the black mirror of the canal. We trailed along the towpath, careful to keep to shadow, our reflections wavering faintly in the water. The lantern, fixed to the prow, had been shaded so narrowly that it showed only a thin beam upon the stones ahead, rendering the boat itself nearly invisible from the street above. Holmes murmured, "A ghost indeed. Observe the cunning of the lantern, enough for safety, not enough for witness." We followed for near half a mile, past deserted warehouses and the looming skeleton of an unfinished viaduct. Then the launch veered sharply, slipping into a side channel little more than a drainage cut, vanishing beneath an arch so low I wondered how they cleared it without scraping. Holmes crouched, eyes alight. "There lies our rabbit hole, Watson. That cut leads to the older Roman drains beneath Deansgate. From there one may pass unseen beneath half the city. The trap, the green light, the vanishings, all contrived to shield this artery. Smuggling is too small a word. This is an invisible highway." He stood suddenly, decision blazing in every line. "Come, we cannot let them vanish again." We hurried to the nearest bridge, where a watchman startled at Holmes's sudden demand. A few words of explanation and the promise of Scotland Yard's authority brought us the loan of a dinghy. Holmes shoved it into the water with practised strength. "In, Watson. We follow by silence, not by speed." Reluctantly I obeyed, gripping my revolver as the dinghy rocked beneath my weight. Holmes rowed with steady precision, each stroke as soundless as a whisper. The canal widened, then narrowed again, swallowing us into the damp breath of the side channel. Darkness pressed close, broken only by the faint gleam of the shaded lantern ahead. For long minutes we glided beneath arches that wept with condensation, our ears filled with the gurgle of unseen trickles and the echo of oars far ahead. Twice Holmes paused, listening, then resumed, with renewed purpose. The air grew colder, tinged with that chemical tang. At length the channel widened into a cavernous chamber of brick, where several passages converged like the spokes of a wheel. In the centre lay a crude platform of timber, lashed together, upon which the smugglers had begun unloading their cargo. We lay still in the dark water, our dinghy hidden in the shadows of an arch. Ash's voice rang low, but distinct. "Quickly now, the wagon waits above. This consignment must be moved before first light." One of the labourers asked something in a nervous tone. Ash cut him short. "The ghost tale keeps them away. Fear is our greatest ally. See you spread it well among the men." He gestured toward a lantern set high upon a crate, a pale green glow spilling eerily across the walls. The sight of it, now robbed of its mystery, stirred both anger and pity in me, so simple a trick yet so cruel in its effect. Holmes's breath brushed my ear. There lies our phantom, yet to seize them now would be folly. We are 2 against 4, with escape routes unknown. We must learn where these goods are bound, knowledge before triumph. He gestured toward a stair cut roughly into the brick, ascending toward a trapdoor above. 2 men heaved the chests up the steps while Ash supervised. The glow of the lantern threw grotesque shadows against the vault. Holmes inched us nearer, every muscle taut with concentration. We heard the scrape of wood above, then the distant rumble of wheels on cobbles. The trapdoor slammed shut, leaving Ash and 1 accomplice behind to secure the remaining load. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Now, Watson, our chance. 2 we may manage. Keep your revolver steady, but do not fire unless I give word. A bullet loosed here would echo to half Manchester." He rode us silently against the platform, then sprang with sudden ferocity. Ash, startled, swung round, just as Holmes's shoulder drove into him. The lantern rocked dangerously, spilling its greenish glow. I leapt after, grappling the second man, who flailed with a length of chain. The platform shuddered beneath our struggle, water slopping through its seams. Ash, wiry but powerful, twisted against Holmes, his hand groping for a concealed blade. Holmes caught his wrist in a vice-like grip, forcing the weapon free with a wrench. The other man, snarling, drove me backward until my heel caught a timber, and I nearly plunged into the canal. Desperation lent me strength. I swung with the butt of my revolver, striking his temple. He crumpled with a groan. Holmes forced Ash down, his knee upon the man's chest. "Enough theatre, Mr. Ash. The curtain falls." Ash spat a curse, his eyes glittering in the pale light. "You know nothing," he hissed. "You have not seen the half of it. This city feeds upon ghosts greater than mine." Holmes's gaze hardened, but before he could press further, a shout echoed from the passage beyond. The other smugglers were returning, footsteps pounding along the timbers. Holmes sprang up, hauling Ash by the collar. "Into the dinghy, Watson. Our play is not yet ended, but we have our actor for the next scene." Together we dragged Ash, bound and cursing, into the little craft. Holmes seized the oars, and with swift strokes we vanished into the black throat of the canal, the cries of our pursuers fading behind us as the city swallowed us once more. The dinghy rocked precariously as Holmes pulled hard at the oars, every muscle in his lean frame taut with urgency. Ash, bound with a coil of rope Holmes had carried for just such an occasion, struggled violently, his curses echoing against the damp brick vaults. The faint green glow of the lantern behind us dwindled, replaced by the blackness of the canal. Only the rhythm of Holmes's strokes and the hiss of water at the bow marked our passage. From far off came the muffled shouts of pursuit, distorted by stone and water, but it was impossible to tell whether the smugglers were near or a mile behind. "Holmes," I whispered, clutching my revolver and straining my eyes in the gloom. "They will follow by boat. If they catch us—" "They will not catch us," Holmes cut in, his voice low and implacable. "This labyrinth is known to them, yes, but knowledge breeds confidence, and confidence breeds error. We need only vanish where they expect us least." He turned the dinghy sharply into a narrower culvert, so tight the oars grazed the slime-coated walls. The darkness closed about us like a tomb, and Ash laughed suddenly, a bitter, rasping sound. "You think you've won, Holmes," he spat, "but you've done nothing but stir the embers of a fire you cannot quench. Do you imagine me the master of this? I am but one hand among many. You will not live long enough to name the rest." Holmes ignored him, but I saw the flicker of interest in his eyes. Every criminal boasts when pressed, he said softly. Yet truth hides even in braggadocio. Remember his words, Watson. One hand among many. He bent to the oars again, driving us further into the culvert until the shouts faded entirely, swallowed by the brick and the water's murmur. At length the culvert opened into a smaller chamber, its roof low enough that we were forced to crouch. A trickle of daylight filtered through a grating above, casting a pale square upon the water. Holmes guided the dinghy beneath it and steadied us with the oar. "This is our exit. Watson, help me with Ash." Between us, we hoisted the struggling prisoner until Holmes's nimble fingers picked the latch of the grating, and with a soft groan of rust it swung upward. We dragged Ash through, emerging in a weed-choked yard behind an abandoned warehouse. The air tasted of rain and coal smoke, sharp after the fetid damp of the tunnels. Holmes bound Ash more securely and gagged him before signalling for me to follow. "We must deliver our catch to Inspector Collis. Sir Alistair must be informed that the ghost of Manchester has been exorcised, at least in part." His eyes narrowed. "But I shall not hand Ash over until I have shaken the tree a little harder. He knows more than he pretends." We hurried through back streets, Ash stumbling between us, his boots scraping the cobbles. Twice he tried to break free, and twice Holmes's grip yanked him short. At last we reached the constabulary offices where Collis, drawn and anxious from a sleepless night, received us with mingled astonishment and relief. "By heaven, Holmes, you've done it! We thought you drowned in that cursed canal, and you bring Ash alive." His men stared wide-eyed as we dragged the bound engineer into the charge room. Yet Holmes's expression was cool, almost disdainful. "Alive, yes," he said, "but his tongue is less obliging than his limbs. He admits nothing and boasts too much. You will find him stubborn, Inspector. Guard him well, for his confederates will not leave him to our mercy without attempt." Collis swore he would keep Ash under lock and key, posting 2 men at his cell. Yet, as we turned to leave, Ash fixed Holmes with a glare of venomous intensity, his gag removed for a moment to take water. "You meddle where you cannot prevail," he hissed. "The tunnels are older than your reason, Holmes. They serve masters who do not show their faces in the light. Strike me down, and another will rise, stronger and cleverer. The ghost will haunt you yet." Holmes regarded him with cold detachment, then turned on his heel without reply. Outside, the drizzle had begun again, fine and persistent. He walked swiftly, his coat drawn close, until we reached the quieter street that led to our lodgings. Only then did he speak. "Watson, note his defiance. Men do not cling so fiercely to their dignity unless they believe themselves shielded by higher powers. Ash is no solitary schemer. There is money behind this and influence enough to protect it. Tonight we glimpse the shape of the hand. Tomorrow we must know whose arm it serves." I could not help but shiver. "Do you believe Sir Alistair himself implicated?" Holmes shook his head. "Croom's pride is too provincial. He fears scandal, not profit. No, this reaches into the warehouses, the mills, perhaps even Parliament. We tread upon dangerous ground, Watson, yet it is precisely in such soil that truth flourishes if one digs deeply enough." He paused, his keen gaze lifting to the wet spires of the city. "We have rattled the ghost's chains. The real spectres will not forgive us easily." That night, Holmes scarcely slept, poring instead over maps of the canal system and lists of cargo manifests supplied by Collis. I drifted into uneasy dreams of green lights hovering over black water, of hidden hands pressing secret levers in the walls. When dawn came, Holmes's face was pale but resolute. He set down his pipe with a decisive tap. "We have the bait, Watson. Now we must draw out the larger fish. Ash will not remain silent long, not if he believes his masters have abandoned him. We must contrive circumstances that loosen his tongue. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. And for that we must return to the tunnels. The stage is not yet cleared. The play goes on. Holmes began the morning with a briskness that belied the hours he had kept vigil. His long fingers flicked through the stack of manifests Collis had supplied, each sheet marked with the cargoes declared along the canal, cotton bales from Liverpool, coal shipments from Wigan, iron billets bound for the foundries. He muttered to himself, arranging and rearranging columns, until at last he tapped one page with sudden emphasis. "Watson, do you perceive the pattern? Here, 3 shipments of cotton to a warehouse listed under Ash's supervision. Each manifest records identical tonnage, yet the weights, tallied at the mill, are consistently short by precisely the same margin. No natural loss could yield such precision. The missing bales are spirited elsewhere, through the tunnels." I bent over the figures, though numbers have never been my strength. "You mean to say they steal from their own consignments?" "Not steal, Watson, divert. To whom and for what profit remains the crux. Cotton, properly shifted abroad, becomes currency in its own right. A syndicate of mill owners might make a fortune by undercutting rivals. But there is more here than profit. Mallory, Glaze, Pell, they all brushed against the discovery. The ghost was conjured not merely to frighten, but to silence." The morning brought confirmation of Holmes's suspicions in an unexpected form. Inspector Collis called at our lodgings, his face drawn. "Ash has been attacked in his cell," he said grimly. "2 of my men were overpowered in the night. Another set of jailers, disguised as constables, gained entrance by forged orders. Ash was nearly strangled with his own bonds. He lives, but barely." Holmes's eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction. "Then we are correct. His masters cannot risk his tongue loosening. Their haste betrays them. Tell me, Inspector, did Ash name his assailants?" Collis shook his head. He raved that the ghost had come for him, and then lapsed into silence. The physician doubts he will recover speech soon, if ever. Holmes paced, his hands clasped behind him. A convenient infirmity, no matter. If Ash cannot tell us, the tunnels themselves shall. They are both artery and secret, and somewhere along their course lies the true heart of this enterprise. We must return there tonight. The inspector frowned. "With respect, Mr. Holmes, after last night's pursuit, the men will be on guard. It is perilous to return without a regiment." Holmes halted, his thin face lit with sudden intensity. Perilous, yes, but necessary. A regiment would rattle the quarry, driving them deeper underground. No, we must move as quietly as they. The advantage of surprise is ours if we act before they expect it. So it was that by twilight we found ourselves once more at the mouth of the spur beneath Deansgate, accompanied only by Collis and Greaves, whose loyalty to his men's memory lent him a grim courage. The air was damp, the bricks glistening with the sweat of centuries. Holmes led us unerringly to the recess where Pell had vanished, his lantern shaded to a narrow slit. He pressed the hidden brick, and the iron plate creaked open, revealing the black throat beyond. A draught breathed cold upon our faces, carrying that faint chemical tang. "This time," Holmes said, "we go willingly into the snare." He passed first, his lean figure swallowed by the dark. I followed close, revolver ready, my pulse quickening as the wall closed behind us. Collis came after, muttering an oath, and Greaves brought up the rear. The tunnel sloped steeply, the stones slick beneath our boots, until it widened suddenly into a chamber half flooded with water. A boat rocked at the edge, tethered to an iron ring. Holmes crouched, examining the boards. Fresh. They were here no more than an hour past. See the scrape of a chest against the gunwale. They have gone deeper in. He motioned us aboard, and with quiet strokes We propelled ourselves into a narrow channel branching east. The walls pressed close, dripping steadily. Twice the passage curved, each turn plunging us further from the city above. At last, the channel opened into a vast cavern supported by brick piers, the water lying black and still. We held our breath. Across the chamber rose a platform stacked with crates, bales and barrels, more than I could number. A dozen men moved among them, loading carts that ascended by an inclined shaft. Lanterns burned pale with the telltale green glow, their ghastly light casting the labourers into shadowed phantoms, and presiding above them all, issuing orders with a voice that brooked no delay, stood a figure I recognised with a chill. Sir Alister Croom. Holmes's hand tightened on my arm. "There is your master, Watson. The alderman who summoned us has played both sides. He builds his fortune upon fear, cloaking theft in superstition. The ghost was his invention, Ash his engineer. We have reached the centre of the web." Collis swore softly, his face livid. Greaves gripped his cap until the cloth tore. "My men died for that swine's profit," he growled. But Holmes held us still with a look. "Not yet. To rush upon them now is to lose everything. We must see where the shaft leads, how wide the net is spread. Only then can we strike with certainty." We watched in silence as the carts rattled upward, their wheels groaning. One by one the bales disappeared into the tunnel's mouth. Sir Alister oversaw the operation with the precision of a banker balancing ledgers, his tall form outlined against the sickly glow. My heart hammered with the enormity of the revelation. The ghost in the Manchester tunnels was no spectral fancy, but the mask of greed and ambition worn by one of the city's most powerful men. Holmes leaned close, his voice a whisper that barely stirred the damp air. "Now, Watson, we tread carefully indeed. The next move must be chosen with the utmost precision, for our adversary commands wealth, influence, and ruthlessness. But he has overlooked one weapon." His eyes gleamed in the lantern's slit. "The truth, once revealed, cannot be buried, even in the deepest tunnel." The scene before us seemed unreal in its enormity, the pale lanterns painting the cavern in hues that made each figure a phantom. Yet there was no mistaking the very real authority with which Sir Alister directed the labourers. His voice carried across the water with a clipped efficiency, every gesture measured, his eyes sweeping the carts as if their movement alone were the lifeblood of his fortune. Holmes remained motionless at my side, his gaze fixed upon the alderman with a cold intensity that I knew heralded swift calculation. Collis, for his part, trembled with suppressed fury, his hand twitching toward the revolver at his belt, but Holmes pressed him back against the shadows with a single, decisive motion. "Not yet," Holmes breathed. "To fire now is to wound the branch while the root thrives. We must know where that shaft ascends. Every bale carried upward is a thread leading us to the greater loom. Patience, Inspector, patience." The carts creaked steadily, dragged by a primitive pulley system, their wheels leaving tracks in the damp incline. Above, the opening of the shaft glowed faintly with lamplight, proof that the enterprise continued, seamlessly, with the city overhead. Holmes studied it keenly, noting every gesture of the men and every interval between loads. Then he touched my arm. "Observe, Watson. The goods are not carried into the warehouse district as one might expect, but toward the very heart of civic Manchester. The secrecy here is doubled by boldness above. They rely upon the respectability of their front to blind the eye of suspicion." Collis swore softly, his face a mask of disbelief. "Do you mean, Holmes, that the alderman himself conceals his theft beneath the very buildings of the council?" "Precisely," Holmes replied. No constable would think to seek contraband beneath the offices of the city's own governors. It is the oldest trick of rogues. Hide in the one place no one dares question, and Croom has played it with ruthless perfection. Greaves clenched his fists, and my lads, taken and silenced to keep his ledger straight. By heaven, I'll see him swing. Holmes turned his sharp gaze upon him. And you shall, but by the gallows of justice, not the fury of vengeance. Their deaths will cry loudest when evidence unmasks their killer. He motioned us back toward the boat, and with silent strokes we withdrew into the darkness of the channel from which we had come. Only when the pale glow had dwindled behind us did Holmes speak at length. We must not act rashly. Tonight we have seen the operation in its fullness. Tomorrow we must obtain proof, documents, manifests, anything that binds Croom's hand to the contraband. Without such evidence his position will shield him, and our word will be cast as slander, but with it we may tear away his mask. We returned by weary stages to the constabulary offices, where Collis, still pale with shock, vowed to assemble trustworthy men for the morrow. Holmes, however, was unsparing. Trustworthy is not enough. Croom's influence runs wide. Choose men of long loyalty and keep your counsel locked behind your teeth. One whisper to the wrong ear and the game is lost. By dawn, Holmes had devised his plan. We would trace the shaft upward, not from within the tunnels but from the city streets, seeking the warehouse or chamber where the stolen goods emerged. He carried us from one quarter of Manchester to another with restless energy, his eyes scanning every facade, his fingers tracing mortar lines and drain covers with the eagerness of a naturalist stalking rare prey. At last, near the rear of the very council building Sir Alistair frequented, Holmes halted abruptly. "Here, Watson. Note the fresh ruts upon the stones, the scuff of wheels concealed beneath ordinary cart traffic. The goods rise here. The shaft must ascend directly beneath this courtyard." We lingered, concealed by the bustle of clerks and messengers, until fortune lent us a glimpse of confirmation. A door opened briefly, and two men slipped out bearing a bale upon their shoulders. They loaded it swiftly onto a waiting dray, the driver flicking his whip without pause as the cart vanished into the throng of the city. Holmes's eyes gleamed with the certainty of victory. "There is our proof. Goods stolen in darkness, delivered in daylight beneath the seal of civic virtue. Now we must seize the trail while it is still warm." We followed the dray at a cautious distance, winding through the congested streets until it drew up before a warehouse at the edge of the cotton district. The bale was carried within without ceremony, as though part of a lawful consignment. Holmes noted the address with precision. "This warehouse shall yield the papers we require. Tonight, Watson, we return by stealth. If Croom's books are kept there, they will betray him more surely than any witness." Collis, though reluctant, gave his assent. "But mind you, Holmes, if this fails, he will crush us. Croom's reach stretches into the very courts." Holmes smiled thinly. "Then we shall present a case so complete that even his wealth cannot corrupt it. Trust, Inspector, that I do not gamble with shadows, wager only when the cards lie face up." The remainder of the day passed in tense preparation. Holmes secured tools for surreptitious entry, while I cleaned my revolver with hands steadier than I felt. Night fell heavy over Manchester, the air thick with the soot of chimneys and the fog of the canal. Together we stole toward the warehouse, the city muffled in uneasy silence. Holmes crouched at the lock, his tools glinting faintly, and within moments the door yielded. We slipped inside, lantern-shaded, the air thick with the musk of cotton and damp wood. Holmes moved swiftly, his eyes searching shelves stacked with ledgers. At last he pulled free a heavy book, its cover worn but its pages alive with neat, incriminating script. "Here, Watson, see the false manifests, the diversions recorded in Ash's hand, countersigned by none other than Alistair Croom. This is the noose itself." A sound cut through the silence, the scrape of a boot upon stone. Holmes stiffened, his lantern extinguished in an instant. From the darkness of the warehouse rose a low voice, mocking and cold. "Did you think, Mr. Holmes, that I would leave my house unguarded?" The pale green glow of a lantern flared at the far end, throwing grotesque shadows across the bales, and Sir Alistair Croom himself stepped forward, flanked by 2 armed men. The greenish light threw every bale into monstrous form, and Sir Alistair's features were carved sharp in its glow, his expression coldly triumphant. The 2 men at his side held pistols steady, their eyes hard, their shoulders squared like hired guards who had faced danger before. Holmes, ever unflinching, slipped the ledger calmly into the breast of his coat, as though he placed nothing more than a newspaper there. His voice, low and even, carried with it the bite of iron. "A prudent man, Sir Alistair, keeps watch over his fortune. Yet prudence may also be the snare by which it collapses, for in attempting to guard it, you reveal it to those who look closely enough." Croom gave a short, humourless laugh. "You overestimate your position, Mr. Holmes. You and your companion are but 2 men, alone and cornered. The constabulary dances to my tune, the courts bow to my influence. Even if you crawled from this place alive, which you shall not, who would dare to accuse me?" Holmes did not move, though I felt his arm tense beside me, like a spring wound to breaking point. "Influence buys silence, Sir Alistair, but not forever. The river of theft you have channeled through these tunnels has left a mark upon the ledgers, a stain that no bribe can wash away. Even now Inspector Collis has men at your council offices. When they discover the carts you so carefully smuggled this night, the circle will close." For the first time, Croom's composure faltered, though only for a heartbeat. He lifted his hand slightly, and one of the guards stepped forward, pistol raised level at Holmes's chest. "Enough! Whatever men Collis has, they will be discredited by dawn. You, however, shall be found in the canal by morning, victims of the ghost you so bravely chased. Fitting, is it not, that your own legend swallows you?" Holmes leaned fractionally toward me, his voice a whisper meant only for my ear. "Hold fast, Watson. Their arrogance will be our lever." Then, louder, he said with a mocking clarity, "Your ghost may frighten labourers, Sir Alistair, but it is a poor weapon against daylight, for I know the shaft above leads to your very council chamber. Shall we call upon your clerks to bear witness to the carts they unloaded?" That barb struck home. Croom's eyes blazed, and in that instant Holmes acted. With a motion so swift it startled even me, he swung his shaded lantern upward, flinging the beam full into the eyes of the advancing guard. The man cried out, staggering back. In the confusion, Holmes hurled the lantern itself against a stack of cotton, which flared briefly with light, though not flame. I seized the moment, striking out at the second guard, who faltered in surprise. My revolver butt met his wrist, sending his pistol clattering upon the floor. Holmes closed upon the first man, twisting the weapon from his hand with brutal precision. For an instant the warehouse was a chaos of shadows, curses, and shuffling feet. Croom himself stood immobile, fury and calculation warring upon his face. When the guard nearest him lunged again, Holmes fired a single shot into the air. The echo rolled through the rafters like thunder, and in that momentary silence came the unmistakable pounding of boots outside. "Collis," Holmes said simply. The door burst open, and 6 constables surged in, their lanterns cutting across the bales. Collis himself strode at their head, his revolver levelled, his eyes ablaze with grim satisfaction. "Drop your arms in the king's name!" he barked. The disarmed guard obeyed at once, his courage evaporating. The other hesitated, but Holmes's gaze alone seemed enough to strip him of defiance. He yielded his weapon with a muttered curse. Sir Alister, however, did not yield so easily. His voice cut through the clamour, firm as ever. "This is outrage! I am an alderman of this city, a servant of the crown. Do you think you can lay hands on me without ruin to yourselves?" Holmes stepped forward, his revolver lowered, but his voice carrying with the force of unshakable certainty. "You are a servant of greed, not of the crown. Your signature lies in this ledger, beside every false consignment, every stolen bail, every silenced man. Your ghost was nothing more than cowardice draped in superstition. And now, Sir Alister, the mask has fallen." Collis gave the order, and 2 constables seized the alderman. He struggled, his dignity shredding into rage, but the manacles clicked fast around his wrists. The warehouse, once filled with the hum of crime, now rang with the harsh order of law reclaiming its ground. As we stepped into the damp night air, Holmes drew a long breath, the ledger still clutched in his hand. "It is done, Watson. Yet I confess I take little satisfaction in this triumph. The ghost of the tunnels was never a phantom, but a reminder that beneath the weight of progress and profit lies always the temptation to conceal crime in the very stones meant to build civilization. Manchester will recover, but the memory of the vanished will remain its scar." I looked upon my friend then with that mixture of awe and humility I so often felt. "But without you, Holmes, the scar would be a graveyard, and the ghost would still walk." He gave a thin smile, already turning his mind toward some further horizon. "Perhaps, Watson. But remember, ghosts seldom vanish forever. They wait, patient, for the next soul willing to wear the sheet, and it is our task to strip it away when they do." The city's bells tolled the hour, and the mist rose again from the canal. As we walked back toward Baker Street, the case concluded, yet its echoes lingering like the faint, hollow note of a kettle deep in the tunnels below. The trial that followed in Manchester was swift in its pace, but heavy with consequence, for seldom had a court of law borne witness to such a tangle of wealth, civic honour, and hidden villainy. Sir Alister Croom stood in the dock, outwardly composed, yet the very posture of his shoulders betrayed a man forced into the role of supplicant. His barristers, men of the highest standing, argued with every ounce of polish that the evidence amounted only to fabrication, that Holmes's methods were theatrical, that the ledger was no more than a forgery placed by malicious rivals. But for every plea Holmes had prepared an answer. The signatures were verified, the manifests tallied with missing cargo, and one of the captured labourers, pressed by Collis with a stern persistence, gave a full confession of the operations beneath the city. I sat beside Holmes throughout those tense hours, and though he appeared aloof, his eyes half closed as if wearied by repetition, I knew his mind recorded every detail with razor precision. The green lantern was produced in court, its eerie glow demonstrated before a hushed gallery, and the effect upon the public was profound. What once had been whispered as ghostly terror was exposed as the simple tool of avarice. The illusion collapsed beneath the stark light of truth. When the jury returned with their verdict of guilty on all charges, a murmur ran through the court like a tide breaking against stone. Sir Alister's composure faltered at last. His lips moved in a bitter sneer, and he muttered words meant only for himself. "One ghost may fall, but another will rise." Then he was taken down, and the case of the Manchester tunnels passed into the annals of the Crown. Holmes, however, did not share in the satisfaction that filled the chamber. As we departed into the grey afternoon, he moved with the distracted air of a man whose thoughts wandered far beyond the triumph at hand. I could not restrain myself from remarking, "Surely, Holmes, this is victory. The villain unmasked, the city freed from its superstition, justice done, yet you look as though the ghost yet walks." He paused, his long fingers drumming lightly upon the railings outside the court. "Justice, yes, Watson, but victory? Consider. Croom was but one man, and though he orchestrated the tunnels with the skill of a financier, he hinted at powers greater than himself. His words at the warehouse were not mere bravado. An enterprise of this scale rarely rests upon a single pair of shoulders. There are others, silent for now, whose interests have been disturbed. We have cut one branch, but the root may remain. I protested that we had seized the ledgers, the carts, and the testimonies, yet Holmes's expression remained clouded. True, we have the evidence to bind Croom, but a syndicate of merchants may shift swiftly, their faces respectable, their dealings obscured by the labyrinth of commerce. Do you suppose every bale vanished without a destination? No, Watson, they were bound for markets that welcomed them, and those markets are not likely to mourn their benefactor. I fear we have stirred waters deeper than even the Manchester canals. We returned to Baker Street after some days, our journey southward cloaked in a weariness that no triumph could dispel. Yet the familiar fog of London lent a comfort to my spirits, and I thought that perhaps Holmes's forebodings might soften with the return to his accustomed haunts. For a time he busied himself with minor affairs, the recovery of a misplaced bond for a city broker, the tracing of a missing spaniel for a dowager who pressed sherry upon us as reward. But I noted in the long evenings that he would often stand at the window, his violin unplayed, his eyes lost in thought. It was on one such evening, some weeks later, that the matter took a strange and final turn. A knock came at our door, and Mrs. Hudson ushered in Inspector Collis, travel-worn but resolute. He carried with him a small package, its paper creased and stained by damp. "From Manchester," he said curtly. "It arrived at my office this morning, addressed to me in Croom's hand. The jailers swear it was passed through no honest channel. I thought it best placed in your hands." Holmes slit the paper with a penknife, and within lay a single sheet, upon which a few words were scrawled, in a hurried but legible script. "The ghost is never gone. Look beneath, and you will see its shadow. I was not alone." There was also a fragment of chalk, the same clay-streaked kind we had seen upon the tunnel walls, marked with 3 lines. "C'est bidit," Collis shifted uneasily. "He cannot have smuggled this from prison unaided. There are still hands at work, Mr. Holmes. I fear the city may not yet be safe." Holmes studied the paper in silence, then turned it toward the fire. The flames caught quickly, curling the message into ash. He held the chalk fragment a moment longer, then placed it carefully into a drawer of his desk. His face, when he looked up, was unreadable. "Perhaps, Inspector," he said at last, "but ghosts thrive upon the credulity of men. Let us not grant them more substance than they deserve. You have your city's safety to watch, and I my own pursuits. If another shadow stirs, we shall be ready." Later that night, when all was still, I asked him quietly whether he truly believed the threat ended. He smiled faintly, a smile without mirth. "My dear Watson, in every tunnel lies the chance of another echo. We silenced one voice, but others may whisper still. It is not ghosts we hunt, but men who clothe themselves in darkness, and men, unlike phantoms, are inexhaustible. So ended the case of the ghost in the Manchester tunnels, leaving in my mind both relief and unease. Justice had been served, yet Holmes's words lingered like the hollow note of air through a hidden shaft, an unfinished sound reminding me that even when the gaslights shine brightest above, secrets will always stir in the shadows below. The weeks that followed seemed almost an afterthought to the storm of revelations that had swept through Manchester. Newspapers across England printed lurid accounts of the ghostly lights, the vanishing men, and the alderman whose pride had concealed avarice on so vast a scale. Yet in Baker Street life resumed its accustomed rhythm, broken only by the arrival of correspondents and the occasional visitor eager to consult Holmes on matters less dramatic. He received them with his usual mixture of keen insight and ironic detachment, but I could see that his thoughts often drifted back toward the dark arches of the northern city. One evening, as autumn pressed its chill upon London, I found him at the hearth with the familiar violin in his hands, though no sound issued from it. Instead, he sat in reflective silence, his gaze fixed upon the chalk fragment resting upon the mantelpiece. I ventured to ask what conclusion he drew from that lingering token. Holmes smiled faintly. "Conclusion, Watson? There are times when the mind must accept uncertainty, though it offends logic. Croom was guilty beyond doubt, and justice has claimed him. But the symbol he left us, those 3 lines, was meant as both boast and warning. It suggests accomplices yet unseen, partners whose names were never written in any ledger. He sought to make himself indispensable to them and to me alike, ensuring that his memory would endure as more than a criminal exposed." I shook my head. "But if others remain, should we not pursue them?" "Perhaps, though the trail may already have gone cold. Men of that breed are careful, and fear has surely taught them silence. It is sometimes better to let shadows disperse in daylight than to chase them endlessly into the dark. We cut the heart from the ghost, Watson, and without it the body cannot walk." He set down the violin and leaned back, his eyes glinting with that curious light which always suggested he looked far beyond the present moment. Besides, every solved case leaves an echo. It reminds us that society is ever balanced between order and corruption, and our task is not to extinguish evil altogether, an impossible pursuit, but to drag it, piece by piece, into the light. I could not help but feel that his words were tinged with melancholy, though he masked it with his habitual dryness. To me, the case would always be one of his most extraordinary victories, yet for him it remained another proof that human cunning, not spectral fear, was the true ghost-haunting civilization. Before the fire sank low, he rose and placed the chalk fragment in a drawer, closing it with finality. "Let us leave Manchester to its mills, Watson. There will be other crimes, other puzzles, perhaps even a more worthy adversary, though I confess the green light beneath Deansgate was an invention almost theatrical in its audacity." We spoke no more of it that night. Yet as I closed my diary upon the final entry, I reflected that Holmes's gift lay not merely in exposing villains, but in stripping away the illusions by which men deceive themselves. The ghost in the tunnels was never supernatural. It was greed cloaked in phosphorescence, fear turned to profit. And as long as such passion stirred in the human heart, Sherlock Holmes would never lack for mysteries to unravel. Thus ended the adventure of the ghost in the Manchester tunnels, leaving me once again in awe of the man who could pierce the darkest shadows with the light of reason, and who, though indifferent to praise, remained the one companion whose genius I would follow unhesitatingly into any depth of night.